Okay. Hey, Philip, how are you?
Hey, Douglas, I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. As I was mentioning before we got on, your office is very indicative of an author with the books everywhere. Are most of the books yours or not?
So the ones directly behind me are these are mine.
Okay.
Everything else is basically research. Everything in my office is primarily research material, and then my, you know, pleasure reading books are sort of everywhere else in the house. But the office is primarily all the books I pull off the shelves when I'm working.
How many books do you have published at this point?
I have two short story collections, three novellas. And then I have a book of poetry. I have a children's book coming out next month, and I have my first trade novel coming out next month. So add that up, five or six by now. And then I have two novels coming out next year.
Okay, so the one we're going to be talking about, A Child Alone with Strangers, that's the latest one?
Yeah, that's coming out October 18th. So just about a month from today. Yeah.
Before we get to your book, I want to touch a little bit on your backstory because it sounds kind of interesting. It says you grew up outside of Detroit and you moved away as a teenager to live in Chicago and you managed a rock band. How did you get that gig?
Yeah, that's interesting. You found that information. Um, yeah, my buddies were in a band in high school, and I went to a year of college in Detroit. And then yeah, they wanted to move to Chicago, so I was kind of helping them out. I wasn't much of a manager; I was more of a roadie, but we called it a manager to be nice. And yeah, so we all moved to Chicago, and I kind of worked with those guys for about a year, and then I moved to Los Angeles, and I've been here ever since. So going on 30 plus years.
Okay, so the band never took off or got famous.
The band never took off or got famous. No, they're scattered around the globe now. The band. I did see two members of the band just in back in May, so we got to catch up, and it was a lot of fun. They're all good guys, and they're all doing very well. But no, they're no longer performing.
So, what was it that made you decide to move to LA?
I wanted to work in the film business. It was sort of a dream of mine to work in film, and I wasn't really digging school. It wasn't working out for me. And I had an opportunity to work on a TV show. I'm sorry, a feature film, a very low budget feature film. So I moved out to LA kind of with nothing, and had this job waiting for me that paid me like $400 a week, I think it was back at that time. Uh, so not a lot to live on, but yeah. So I wanted to work in film and TV. My dream was to be a screenwriter and a movie director. This is when I was in my early 20s. The screenwriting part worked out. The director thing is probably not something that's in the cards, which is okay. I prefer writing. So yeah, so that's what I did. And I ended up doing film and TV on and off for 30 years.
Okay, so can I ask what year that was that you first moved to LA?
I moved. Oh man, I'm terrible with years. That would have been 1991.
Okay, so the internet and
I
all
was.
the online stuff was pretty much in its infancy at that point, right?
It wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't even around. It was. Like I said, I worked on and off in the film industry. So around 2000, um, I'm sorry, from 1995 to about 2000, I was working in a music business, working for a company called House of Blues Entertainment, and I was actually head of their digital division for a while, and I was one of the first people. House of Blues was one of the first companies, but I was the producer, one of the first people to do a live audio broadcast over the internet. We did it in conjunction with our Real Networks, who had something called the Real Player. This is before,
I remember that.
streaming.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
so
yeah.
so we did a broadcast of the Blind Boys of Alabama from House of Blues here in Los Angeles, and it was written up all over the world. It was the first audio broadcast ever produced over the internet of a live concert. So that was me doing that. So I was kind of on the cutting edge of a lot of that technology stuff, and it was something I did for, like I said, for about 6 years, 7 years, before I moved on and did other things.
Well, what's amazing about that is that the people that were cutting edge, and I know a couple of people that were doing their own TV productions back in those days. And the problem was is that most people didn't have the internet speed to handle it, to do live streaming. You know, they could download it over their modem and take about 2 hours to get one little file. I mean, it was great, but unless you had really fast internet, you couldn't really enjoy it.
Yeah, that was some of the growing pains as we would do these concerts, and people would complain because every 5 seconds it would be buffer. You know, the last thing you want to do when you're listening to a live concert is deal with buffering. And then we ended up doing video, not, I think a couple of years after that, and then we really got hit with people, not really enjoying the experience just because, to your point, the bandwidth wasn't there yet. So by the time I left House of Blues in 2001. They were just ramping up to digital quality broadcasting. They were laying T1 lines and fiber optic cables and stuff like that. So the bandwidth was accelerating very quickly, and the server farms were growing very quickly. And yeah, it was an interesting time to be doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it sure was. I mean, I can remember, as I'm also a musician, and we got on a site in the late 90s, I think, called mp3.com.
Sure.
You remember that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
That was sort of funded by Alanis Morissette when she got very famous, and Carol Bayer Sager, who was Burt Bacharach's wife at the time. And it was an interesting site because it showed where it was going to go with Spotify and with all of that. But the only people that were listening to it were other musicians. They could not attract the non-musician crowd to it for some reason. So it just kind of disintegrated.
Yeah, and then eventually Napster and all that kind of emerged from those days. And and I used to work with broadcast.com, which was owned by Mark Cuban, who subsequently sold broadcast.com to Yahoo for $5 billion, literally, and bought the Dallas Mavericks, and now was doing all sorts of crazy stuff. But I worked with Mark, and he was one of the pioneers at that time as well. So yeah, it was kind of fascinating to be on the cutting edge of all that stuff. It was a cool time for technology. Yeah.
Well, especially when you look back at it now, and everybody has a phone glued to their head. Which we didn't have back then. And you think, wow, it's just changing so quickly, and like, what's the next thing going to be?
Yeah, my only regret from those days is that I was in the technology space, and I should have known better that I did not buy Amazon stock.
Well,
I don't really know what I was thinking.
We all had those moments. I mean, I had the opportunity to buy Yahoo GeoCities for about $30 a share. And I said, no, I don't want to buy that. And then it went to 3,000 or something. It was just incredible,
Yeah.
But what do you think the next step's going to be with technology, the next major leap?
It's a good question. It's something I think about primarily because, of my experience in the industry, but also because, I have a son who's just turned 22 years old. So he's kind of doing a lot of interesting things with, a lot of it is gaming related, but gaming in itself is becoming such a social platform for the younger generation, and I don't know. I know we're already doing the watches, right, and we're already doing the glasses, so I don't really know what else we could do other than just speed it up. But I would like to think. I think 3D imaging is probably going to be the next big wave. I think you're going to start seeing a lot of those Star Trek type holograms, popping up. And once they get the technology right, I think that'll be the next wave is full immersion in a 3D environment is going to be, I think, more and more common. Once they get I think the bandwidth is there. I think it's just figuring out the hologram technology, but I think that'll be the next wave.
I hope they don't start doing, chip implants into your brain. So that's scary to me.
I think I mean, or the barcodes, the QR codes on our wrist or whatever, it's all very Mark of the Beast, but
tattooed onto you. Yeah.
I don't really, I'm one of those guys that's kind of like, I'm not going to be here that long, so I'm gonna make myself as comfortable as possible, and if that means getting a chip in my arm, so be it, because when I'm dead, I'm not going to care anyway. So,
Well,
but
that's the
well,
right
we'll
attitude.
see how it goes.
All right. Let's touch on your book. So, your book is called A Child Alone with Strangers. The title is scary enough as it is. Why don't you give us a synopsis of the book, maybe 1 or 2 minutes if you can?
Yeah, sure. So, A Child Alone with Strangers it's sort of a crime horror hybrid. It's definitely a throwback, old school sort of horror novel. It's what we used to call, a doorstop kind of novel, 600 pages, and it's very, rich with characters and events. And primarily what happens in the book, without any spoilers or anything, is there's a young boy who is the protagonist, um, who is kidnapped, and he is taken to a remote farmhouse in the middle of a forest preserve, and so it's completely isolated, and by this group of kidnappers and held for ransom. And the boy has certain powers of telepathic powers, and he communes with something that lives in the woods surrounding this abandoned farmhouse. And what the kidnappers do not realize is that there is something in the farmhouse that buried deep down below in the root cellar that this creature very much wants to get to, and the kidnappers are in the way. So the young boy and this creature basically make the kidnappers' lives a living hell, and kind of work together to try and save each other, as it were. But things kind of go sideways from there, and it doesn't go as you'd think. So that's the basic premise of the book. So it's kind of, there's a crime element where there's an investigator and a family trying to hunt down the child, and I worked with like a CIA and an FBI consultant on that, so it's very kind of procedural. And then there's this kind of supernatural horror element, and it all kind of comes together for the last act, which is a lot of fun.
Where did this story come from? Just pure imagination, or did something spark it? Some real life case or event?
No, this one was pure imagination. It was my first stab at a genre novel, because I've been writing ever since I was a child, but as an adult, I wrote a lot of what we'd refer to, I guess, as literary horror, meaning not genre horror, not sci-fi, but very dark kind of literary fiction, and I wasn't really getting anywhere with that. And then about 7 years ago, I decided to start writing genre fiction. I wrote my first horror story, sold it within, I think, 48 hours, and then everything kind of took off from there. So this was my first crack at a genre novel. So I really wanted it to be big and and fun, and kind of like, I call it sort of a kitchen sink novel. It's kind of got all these fun horror elements that I grew up with as a kid, reading Stephen King and Peter Straub and Clive Barker and Dean Koontz and all these guys. I kind of wanted to have a lot of those elements all sort of thrown into this big, sprawling novel. And so it was really just a matter of kind of coming up with the character arc and the story that I wanted to tell. And once I kind of had the kidnapping angle and the sort of creature in the woods angle and the sort of telepathic powers angle, I kind of shoved it all into a story that I think ended up being a lot of fun. But no, it was just purely me just kind of thinking about what kind of story would I want to read, what kind of book would I want to buy and have on my shelf, and spend some lost weekends and nights reading. And that was kind of the impetus for writing this one.
Well, Philip, we are running out of time very quickly. We got to wind this down. You said the book will be coming out next month?
Yeah, this book comes out on October 18th of 2022. Yeah,
Nice, so just about a month from now.
just about a month. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, listen, it was nice talking to you. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, my website is P and then my last name. So it's pfracassi.com.
Okay. And there's links to the book and information about where they can buy it and all that.
Yeah, there's a newsletter and a blog, and there's links to all my books and contact information and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, that's the best place to go.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for coming on this show. It was nice talking to you. Best of luck with your book and all your other projects.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Douglas.